a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Pierre Trudeau. Joseph Philippe Pierre-Yves Elliott Trudeau, often referred to by the initials PET, was a Canadian statesman who served as the 15th Prime Minister of Canada. He is the third longest-serving Prime Minister in Canadian history, having served for 15 years, 164 days. Trudeau rose to prominence as a lawyer, intellectual, and activist in Quebec politics. In the 1960s he entered federal politics by joining the Liberal Party of Canada. He was appointed as Lester B. Pearson's parliamentary secretary and later became his Minister of Justice. Trudeau became a media sensation, inspiring Trudeaumania, and took charge of the Liberals in 1968. From the late 1960s until the mid-1980s, his personality dominated the political scene to an extent never before seen in Canadian political life. Despite his personal motto, "Reason before passion," his personality and political career aroused polarizing reactions throughout Canada. Admirers praise what they consider to be the force of Trudeau's intellect and his political acumen, maintaining national unity over the Quebec sovereignty movement, suppressing a Quebec terrorist crisis, fostering a pan-Canadian identity, and in achieving sweeping institutional reform, including the implementation of official bilingualism, patriation of the Constitution, and the establishment of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Critics accuse him of arrogance, of economic mismanagement, and of unduly centralizing Canadian decision-making to the detriment of the culture of Quebec and the economy of the prairies. He retired from politics in 1984, and John Turner succeeded him. His eldest son, Justin Trudeau, became the 23rd and current Prime Minister as a result of the 2015 federal election and is the first Prime Minister of Canada to be a descendant of a former Prime Minister. Early life. The Trudeau family can be traced to Marseille-Clanville in France in the 16th century and to a Robert Trudeau. In 1659 the first Trudeau to arrive in Canada was Etienne Trudeau or Trudeau, a carpenter and home builder from La Rochelle. Pierre Trudeau was born at home, at 5779 de Rocher Avenue, Outremont, Montreal, on October 18, 1919, to Charles-Émile Charlie Trudeau, a French-Canadian businessman and lawyer, and Grace Elliott, who was of mixed Scottish and French-Canadian descent. He had an older sister named Suzette, and a younger brother named Charles Jr. He remained close to both siblings for his entire life. The family had become quite wealthy by the time Trudeau was in his teens, as his father sold his prosperous gas station business to Imperial Oil. Trudeau attended the prestigious Collège Jean de Brébeuf, where he supported Quebec nationalism. Trudeau's father died when Pierre was 15 years old. This death hit him and the family very hard emotionally. Trudeau remained very close to his mother for the rest of her life. According to longtime friend and colleague Marc Lalonde, the clerically influenced dictatorships of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in Portugal, Francisco Franco in Spain, and Marshal Philippe Pétain in Vichy France were seen as political role models by many youngsters educated at elite Jesuit schools in Quebec. Lalonde asserts that Trudeau's later intellectual development as an intellectual rebel, anti-establishment fighter on behalf of unions and promoter of religious freedom, came from his experiences after leaving Quebec to study in the United States, France, and England, and to travel to dozens of countries. His international experiences allowed him to break from Jesuit influence and study French progressive Catholic philosophers such as Jacques Maritain and Emmanuel Mounier, as well as John Locke and David Hume. Education and the Second World War. Trudeau earned his law degree at the Université de Montréal in 1943. During his studies, he was conscripted into the Canadian Army as part of the National Resources Mobilization Act. When conscripted, he decided to join the Canadian Officers Training Corps, and he then served with the other conscripts in Canada, since they were not assigned to overseas military service until after the conscription crisis of 1944 after the invasion of Normandy that June. Before this, all Canadians serving overseas were volunteers, and not conscripts. Trudeau said he was willing to fight during World War II, but he believed that to do so would be to turn his back on the population of Quebec that he believed had been betrayed by the government of William Lyon Mackenzie King. Trudeau reflected on his opposition to conscription and his doubts about the war in his memoirs. So there was a war? tough. If you were a French Canadian in Montreal in the early 1940s, you did not automatically believe that this was a just war. We tended to think of this war as a settling of scores among the superpowers. In an Outremont by-election in 1942 he campaigned for the anti-conscription candidate Jean Drapeau. After the war Trudeau continued his studies, first taking a master's degree in political economy at Harvard University's Graduate School of Public Administration. He then studied in Paris, France in 1947, at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. Finally, he enrolled for a doctorate at the London School of Economics, but did not finish his dissertation. Trudeau was interested in Marxist ideas in the 1940s, and his Harvard dissertation was on the topic of communism and Christianity. Thanks to the great intellectual migration away from Europe's fascism, Harvard had become a major intellectual center in which he profoundly changed. Despite this, Trudeau found himself an outsider of French Catholic living, for the first time outside of Quebec in the predominantly Protestant American Harvard University. This isolation deepened finally into despair, and led to Trudeau's decision to continue his Harvard studies abroad. In 1947 Trudeau traveled to Paris to continue his dissertation work. Over a 5-week period he attended many lectures and became a follower of personalism after being influenced most notably by Emmanuel Mounier. He also was influenced by Nikolai Berdyaev, particularly his book Slavery and Freedom. Max and Monique Nemny argue that Berdyaev's book influenced Trudeau's rejection of nationalism and separatism. The Harvard dissertation remained unfinished when Trudeau entered a doctoral program to study under the socialist economist Harold Lasky at the London School of Economics. This cemented Trudeau's belief that Keynesian economics and social science were essential to the creation of the good life in democratic society. Early career. From the late 1940s through the mid-1960s, Trudeau was primarily based in Montreal and was seen by many as an intellectual. In 1949 he was an active supporter of workers in the asbestos strike. In 1956 he edited an important book on the subject, La Grève de l'Amiante, which argued that the strike was a seminal event in Quebec's history, marking the beginning of resistance to the conservative, francophone clerical establishment and anglophone business class that had long ruled the province. Throughout the 1950s, Trudeau, as the co-founder and editor of Cité Libre, a dissident journal that helped provide the intellectual basis for the Quiet Revolution, was a leading figure in the opposition to the repressive rule of Premier of Quebec Maurice Duplessis. From 1949 to 1951 Trudeau worked briefly in Ottawa, in the Privy Council office of the Liberal Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent as an economic policy advisor. He wrote in his memoirs that he found this period very useful later on, when he entered politics, and that senior civil servant Norman Robertson tried unsuccessfully to persuade him to stay on. His progressive values and his close ties with Cooperative Commonwealth Federation intellectuals led to his support of and membership in that Federal Democratic Socialist Party throughout the 1950s. Despite these connections, when Trudeau entered federal politics in the 1960s he decided to join the Liberal Party of Canada rather than the CCF's successor, the New Democratic Party. Trudeau felt the federal NDP could not achieve power, expressed doubts about the feasibility of the centralizing policies of the party, and felt that the party leadership tended toward a donations approach he could not support. In his memoirs, published in 1993, Trudeau wrote that during the 1950s he wanted to teach at the Université de Montréal, but was blacklisted 3 times from doing so by Maurice Duplessis, then Premier of Quebec. He was offered a position at Queen's University teaching political science by James Corrie, who later became principal of Queen's, but turned it down because he preferred to teach in Quebec. During the 1950s he was blacklisted by the United States and prevented from entering that country, because of a visit to a conference in Moscow, and because he subscribed to a number of left-wing publications. Trudeau later appealed the ban, and it was rescinded. Law professor enters politics. An associate professor of law at the Université de Montréal from 1961 to 1965, Trudeau's views evolved towards a liberal position in favor of individual rights counter to the state, and made him an opponent of Quebec nationalism. He admired the labor unions, which were tied to the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, and tried to infuse his Liberal Party with some of their reformist zeal. By the late 1950s Trudeau began to reject social democratic and Labour parties, arguing that they should put their narrow goals aside and join forces with liberals to fight for democracy first. In economic theory, he was influenced by Professors Joseph Schumpeter and John Kenneth Galbraith while he was at Harvard. Trudeau criticized the Liberal Party of Lester Pearson when it supported arming Bomark missiles in Canada with nuclear warheads. Nevertheless, he was persuaded to join the party in 1965, together with his friends Gérard Peltier and Jean Marchand. These three wise men ran successfully for the Liberals in the 1965 election. Trudeau himself was elected in the safe Liberal riding of Mount Royal, in Western Montreal. He would hold this seat until his retirement from politics in 1984, winning each election with large majorities. Upon arrival in Ottawa, Trudeau was appointed as Prime Minister Lester Pearson's parliamentary secretary, and spent much of the next year travelling abroad, representing Canada at international meetings and bodies, including the United Nations. In 1967 he was appointed to Pearson's cabinet as Minister of Justice, Justice Minister and Leadership candidate. As Minister of Justice, Trudeau was responsible for introducing the landmark Criminal Law Amendment Act, an omnibus bill whose provisions included, among other things, the decriminalization of homosexual acts between consenting adults, the legalization of contraception, abortion and lotteries, new gun ownership restrictions, as well as the authorization of breathalyzer tests on suspected drunk drivers. Trudeau famously defended the segment of the bill decriminalizing homosexual acts by telling reporters that "Terry's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation," adding that "what's done in private between adults doesn't concern the criminal code." Trudeau paraphrased the term from Martin O'Malley's editorial piece in the Globe and Mail on December 12, 1967. Trudeau also liberalized divorce laws, and clashed with Quebec Premier Daniel Johnson, Sr. during constitutional negotiations. At the end of Canada's centennial year in 1967, Prime Minister Pearson announced his intention to step down, and Trudeau entered the race for the Liberal leadership. His energetic campaign attracted massive media attention and mobilized many young people, who saw Trudeau as a symbol of generational change. Going into the leadership convention, Trudeau was the front-runner and a clear favorite with the Canadian public. However, many Liberals still had reservations given that he joined the Liberal Party in 1965 and that his views, particularly those on divorce, abortion, and homosexuality, were seen as radical and opposed by a substantial segment of the party. During the convention, prominent cabinet minister Judy Lamarche was caught on television profanely stating that Trudeau wasn't a Liberal. Nevertheless, at the April 1968 Liberal Leadership Convention, Trudeau was elected as the leader on the fourth ballot, with the support of 51% of the delegates. He defeated several prominent and long-serving Liberals including Paul Martin Sr., Robert Winters, and Paul Hellyer. As the new leader of the governing Liberals, Trudeau was sworn in as Prime Minister 2 weeks later on April 20. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?